Well, in order to really do this right, it seems to me I have no choice but to separate the tuning condenser from the dial mechanism. So I'm taking that apart. It wouldn't be a big deal if it used something like Allen wrench screws in here, but instead it uses these funky things that have flat rectangular heads. Luckily that first one was loose enough I could just use these snub-nosed pliers on them. Now let's see about the other. Yep. Alright, just hope it goes back together that easily and it's properly aligned. Ta-da. So, if we take this out of the way, we got a conventional radio. So you can take this and mount it on the chassis and just stick a tuning knob on it and a dial, and there you go. Your standard Philco radio. So with that out of the way, now I can put on these new reproduction mounts much more easily. So you've got here, and the back one actually detaches and mounts here. You see some nice cadmium corrosion on that. This is all filthy. So in addition to replacing these mounts, I want to get this all cleaned up too. And should be bearings in here somewhere. Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah, now I can get the bearings readily down in there. Get that flushed out, put some new grease in there, and hit the points on either end as well, and get this gear cleaned up and lubricated. Oh, it's actually a twin gear and they're slightly offset. Wonder if they're supposed to be offset or in line. Well, compared to the others, let's see. Oh, I don't. That's right. I sold the tuning capacitor that used to attach to that one. Anyways, I'll check out the other spare chassis I've got. Now back to these. So these have pockets on the inside, slide in like so. And then this notch is what goes into the chassis. So it goes down like that. So get the other one on there. Oh, of course I got this facing backwards, just noticed. Should go like this. So that's why that third one is detachable, because there'd be no physical way to do this if it was all one piece. Okay, so there's that, so nice and bouncy now. And now the third one, you put this on. It's a little finicky to get this all together, but I have done it once before. And then get it down in here. And screw it back onto the back of the capacitor. There we go. And then it gets held in an old sheet metal screw. And that will be that. And it's all nice and cushioned. Nice action on that. And you can see I've also got all the proper original type G tubes in there with the new base shields. So. Also, depending on what order you watch my videos or I post them, I'd mentioned in my Philco 15DX I had to order up some rubber chassis mounts and tuning capacitor mounts. Well, I also was very much surprised to see that Renovated Radios also sells these just for the 38.7 chair side. These rubber mounts, they weren't used on any other Philcos, at least not in this dimension. It's not the most common radio, so I was surprised that he would make reproductions just for one specific model. So I only have one of the originals left, and more importantly, the board that goes against this, that these rubber mounts go into, was clearly missing from mine. So I'm sure that's why one of them fell off, because they weren't even doing anything. Mine was attached, so it mounts in the chassis like this, vertically. And mine was just held on by 2 bolts, the top of the tuning mechanism, and that was it. So it's supposed to be held in by those, yeah, and then there's supposed to be a board that goes over the whole back, and it also is secured. I think most of the way it really is held in on these rubber shock mounts here. So eventually I will get around to cutting out that support board. I've got a detailed tracing and notes about how to cut it out and drill the holes and plane down some channels on the sides, and it looks like it's going to be a fun little project. But for now, just to get this radio all back together and working, so pop this back out and get it all cleaned up, and then decide about the tuning mechanism. Do I want to clean this one up and mount it on here, since it had the mechanism works on it, or go with the other one? I guess I'll just compare them side by side and see which dial face is in better condition. Actually, I can already tell you this one is. I had not noticed that. Check out the corrosion on the dial pointer on that one. This one's much nicer. And yeah, this one's rusty. Yeah, well, forget that. I'll go with this. Did notice one thing right away, though. Oh, yeah. Oh, man. Okay. So, notice that this has a bunch of cones along in there. And this does not. That's because when I parted this out, there was somebody who wanted some cones, so I took them out and sold them to him. Yeah, I can take them off the other one and put them on here, but I'll have to go through the process of figuring out exactly where they should be. Ugh. Or I suppose the other option I can do is take these apart and swap dial faces, dial pointers, but man, I don't even know. Well, I do have some service info, and I can see it has that same type of slotted connector down in there, but no. I'm not going to get involved in that mess. Just taking that apart. Taking this whole thing apart. Well, I'll think about it, but maybe for now I'd be better off just sticking with this one in spite of the bit of corrosion on it. Because it does have all the preset cones already set up properly. And who knows, with a bit of cleaning, maybe I can get this switch to work. And as I've said before, I don't even know that I really care. I may, once the radio's back together, I might find it so irritating I just disable it anyways. Well, I figured if I'm going to clean this, I might as well really clean it, so I went ahead and took it all apart. Well, partially all apart. I realized that all I had to do was take a screw out of this end, and these two came out. And you pop the springs apart, and 2 pieces of some gears, and probably be a little bit of fun to get these springs back in, but I'll manage. It pops back on, put the screw in. This was held in by a little one of these guys. What those are called, split washer thingies. So I'll re-grease that to get that put in there. And basically I went over this whole thing with naval jelly and then rinsed it off really good, dried it really good, and I think I'm ready to start putting it together. Oh, and another key thing was to take the ball bearing off the back. So there's a ring of bearings around the axle on the front, and on the back there's just a single one. You do not want to lose that. And then that's held on by both a threaded shaft, or threaded piece of metal with a couple on the end, that's where the bearing sits. And then there's both a screwdriver and a nut. So the deal is you tighten the nut down as tight as it can go, and then you can adjust the tension on this. If you make it too tight, this won't rotate. If you make it too loose, a little bit of slop. So that's how you adjust the tension on that bearing there. So I'll take this back off and then pack that with grease, and pack the other bearing with grease, and this action should be all nice and smooth. Let's get the bearing back out now. Go. Here's a tuning cap remounted on a nice new rubber shock mounts. I then proceeded to wire in the grid cap through my pop rivet there. And now I'm working on taking these coil covers off, partly to clean them and partly because I want to replace this wire. There had been some electrical tape wrapped around it, which I just removed, and now I can see why. It's because the insulation all frayed away. So I'm going to cut the end of this off so that I can slide this up, and then I will run a new wire down through it and solder this back on. A few years ago, when I first started working on this radio, somebody contacted me online because he had gotten the same radio. And fortunately, his has the support board that's missing from mine, so we traded notes, and he was kind enough to trace his out and include some key measurements. So here is that tracing, and I've got some other dimensions and measurements written down elsewhere. Basically, it's a piece of 3/4 inch plywood. Needs to be cut out square, notch off a couple corners, or chamfer, I guess you call it, and then cut out some holes and drill some holes. So I'm going to be out running some errands later today. I figure I'll stop by the hardware store and get some plywood. Here is a photo of his actual board. It's in metric, but I was able to translate those dimensions easily enough. Tricky bit is not so much going to be cutting it out as it is cutting to 2mm depth on either side. I don't know how critical that is. So I think I'll try doing it with leaving this uncut. I guess you call it a rabbit, and see how it fits. Now, it's funny reading through our email correspondence, because at one point he sent one of his rubber chassis mounts to Renovated Radios to see if he could make reproductions, and he was, and that's why he sells them on his site. I commented earlier, I was surprised to see that he would be selling mounts for just this one rather obscure radio. Well, that's why, because this guy had actually specifically requested that he make some for his radio. So there we go. There's another angle on it. So 19mm, that's basically 3/4 of an inch. And there's how it goes in the cabinet. So right now, this is how mine is right now, if I was to put the chassis in there. It's just held on by a couple bolts up here. There's no board, and here's where the rubber mounts go to cover up the back, so it should look like that, not just hanging in space like that. I don't know how. Well, I guess I'll have to do the best I can. That's where the rubber mount actually fits in. It's stepped. It's 2 diameters smaller than a larger. So, well, I got a drill press. I got plenty of drill bits, so I'm sure I can manage something with that. Let's get a shot of it, as it should look when it's all together. So obviously the openings there. Power cord, speaker, and the antenna. I hope nobody's left me comments about these gears and the springs and what they're for, because I did some reading on my own, and I think I have a pretty good grasp on them now. They are there to eliminate backlash or slop between the gears. Imagine you just had two solid gears. There is always going to be a little bit of a gap between the teeth. And when you would rock back and forth, there'd be a little slop, a little play between the gears. So by having them slightly offset with springs, no matter which way you're going, one of them is always pressed up tight against the other gear. So it's a very clever solution to that problem. It makes us feel, oh, so nice. Alright, so moving back to these coils. Got both cans out, start to polish them up. They're going to look real nice. And while I had them open and exposed, I cleaned off the tuning caps on top. I'm sure I'll have to align it now because I monkeyed with the screws a little bit. When you've got these open and exposed, you've got to be so careful. If I was to break off one of these little fine wires, it would really ruin my day. Now, somebody had left me a comment on an earlier video that he was surprised that all these coils were still good, because he'd heard that they were prone to failure in this era. And yeah, that's certainly true of the Philco 60s. When I did my Philco 60L, I had to rewind 2 of the coils. But these appear to be a different construction technique, even though they're from, well, I guess these are a little bit later. The Philco 60s were like 34 to 36 maybe. This is a 38. So those earlier ones had an inner core, inner winding, and then a piece of like celluloid or something, and then another winding like the secondary. I think what would happen is that celluloid or whatever adhesive they used would cause the wire to deteriorate and fail, whereas these just seem to be encased in wax. So I think that's why they are all still good. I was very careful to salvage this, whatever this is, fish paper or something like that, insulating, in other words. So I'll wrap that back around and slide these cans back over. I had to take this off completely to get at this wire, which I still need to replace because it goes through a hole in the top and wraps around over to that lug. So once I get these all cleaned up and this wire replaced, I'll put that all back together, and I just have this one little section left to do. And look at this package. It just arrived, very timely, late on a Friday, just in time for the weekend. It is my order of all these little rubber goodies and 2 knobs, because not only does Renovated Radios have reproduction rubber mounts, they also have reproduction knobs. So these are 2 fine tuning knobs for the Motorola VT71 7-inch TVs. Those fine tuning knobs that are always missing. So I got a couple of those. So I'll pop this bag open and give you a closer look at what all I got. Okay, like I said, first off, got these Motorola VT71 fine tuning knobs. Very nice. And then we've got the shock mounts for this. These will replace that. I guess I could leave one original in there, but I might as well replace them both so they're both have the same amount of cushioning on them. Alright, so that is that. These eccentric ones are from my Philco 643 farm radio, which I will get back to one of these days. These go on the front of the chassis and lock into a corresponding hole in the cabinet. These are for a radio I got a while ago but have never talked about on YouTube yet. And we're not going to now. I'm just going to tease you. Some of you know what it is because I did post some photos. I just couldn't resist. But I am actually going to take vacation last week of July for the first time in years. I'm actually going to take some time off. And part of that will be to rearrange, clean up my kitchen, which will finally give me access to this mystery radio, at which time I will do an in-depth video on it. Now, all the rest of these are just all for various projects. Philco 643, Philco 623, and my Philco 15DX. I figure these are probably good for the main chassis. And I may have to build up several of these for that tuner that's sunk down too low and the tuning shaft isn't lining up. So like I may have to do something like this. The originals, as near as I can make out, I still have the originals, and they're hardened and shrunk a bit, but they're probably 3/4 of an inch originally, and the biggest repros I could get were 3/8. So may need to do a little bit of experimenting, maybe even go that thick. One way or another, I will get it right. I got a lot of options to choose from now, so no excuses. Alright, so I think I'll cut off the video here and pick up when this is all back together. Alright, I'll give you a little hint. There is the radio in question, so as you can see, it's barricaded behind all this stuff. So actually tonight I'm hoping to move the Scott. The Scott has been sitting here since the day I got it. I've got a friend stopping by hopefully soon that can help me move this beast. And I'm going to put it on the back porch in that new shelving system I put together. Because another project I want to do is to fix up my antique kitchen table. So I need to get all this stuff out of here. So that, Philco predictor heads, Philco 118MX, and then the mystery radio, which is also covered with some CRTs, and then of course there's a Westinghouse WR8, which, believe it or not, I actually did do a little bit of work on. I refinished this, the bezel that goes around the clock, and I remounted the clock, so I am actually making a little bit of progress on it. There's a chassis for it. I will get back to it someday. This is with all the stuff in the way, I can't work on that cabinet, I just don't have the room, so that's why I'm taking some time off to deal with all this stuff.